Our reading this morning is from the book of Acts, chapter 9, and this is a story that might be familiar to you. May we all hear it with open ears and an open heart today. It is written, "Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of Jesus, went to the authorities and asked for letters to the synagogues at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now, as he was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?' And he asked, 'Who are you?' And the reply came, 'I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do.' And the men who were traveling with him stood speechless because they heard the voice but saw no one. Saul got up from the ground, and though his eyes were open, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And for 3 days he was without sight and neither ate nor drank." What does it take for you to change? What does it take for you to change? How do you know when it is time to make changes in your life? What compels you to give up something or some way of being that has been important to you? To change something that has become habitual or easy or comfortable? How have you realized in your past that a different path could be taken? A different future hoped for, a new way of being? And I guess I should ask, have you ever had to do so? And these changes can be large or small. It could be change in relationship, or the tone in which you write an email. It could be a decision to change your relationship with food, or choosing to smile at strangers. Maybe it was your comfort level in public gatherings in a new COVID moment, or a decision about how and where you spend your money. You know yourselves, and you know each other. What does it take for you to change? Today we have been told, maybe for the 1,000th time, the story of Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus. And as we heard earlier, it took a momentous event for Saul to change, a bright, blinding light and an unseen voice. Saul was a long-time persecutor of the followers of Jesus. And he is said to have taken part even in the killing of one of the early apostles named Stephen, who was an early leader in the way, which would later become what we now call Christianity. And so here we encounter Saul, a very prominent person in Roman Palestine, both a Pharisee and a Roman citizen, asking permission to travel to Damascus and to persecute anyone affiliated with the way. Scholars suggest that this probably happened 5 or more years after Jesus was killed. And so the followers of Jesus were still active, and so was the desire to eliminate them. It also must be noted that the request to travel from Jerusalem to Damascus was no small thing. Damascus, now the capital of modern-day Syria, is about 150 miles from Jerusalem. So this means it could be up to a 2-week journey by foot. I know you all know what that's like, traveling for 2 weeks on foot to get to Damascus, so I don't need to tell you how intentional this has to be. So Saul was very serious to find members of the way and bring them bound back to Jerusalem. So this journey may not have been rare 2,000 years ago, but it certainly wasn't done casually. So, as Saul and his companions were approaching Damascus many days into this long journey, he experienced what we call a theophany. Theophany, which means an encounter with a manifestation of the divine. This theophany was both visual and auditory, with a blinding light and the voice of God through Jesus. And his companions heard the voice, but did not see anyone, nor did they see the blinding light. And this experience left Saul blind and helpless. This theophany left Saul a changed person. This moment changed Saul, the persecutor of the followers of Jesus, into Paul, the apostle, one of the most fervent spreaders of the message of Jesus. Saul was called into something new, and it took a theophany to initiate that change. There are many historical, medical, and psychological theories about this moment, as we are apt to do. They range from wonderings about sunstroke or exhaustion or a stroke or a seizure and epilepsy. But it seems to me that the fact of this situation is less important in this moment than the truth of the encounter. And the truth is that it left a human being profoundly and forever changed. And change is difficult. You know this. And yet, I think we often forget exactly how hard it is. To change is uncomfortable, sometimes even painful. I've heard my father say, more times than I can even recount, this sentence: people only change when the pain of not changing exceeds the pain of change. I will say it again. People only change when the pain of not changing exceeds the pain of change. It speaks such truth. So often we only make changes to our lives or our institutions or our societies when the only way forward is to change, when we have no other choice, when it is either between change or calamity. I recently heard from a wise friend of mine that he only ended up retiring at the time he did from a demanding job after he got sick in a pretty scary way. How often do people only change their diet or their way of living after the heart attack? Or reform an institution after something goes horribly awry? Change is difficult, and we often only do it when not changing will hurt worse. And change also invariably and inevitably contains loss of some sort. And we don't usually like loss, do we? We don't like to lose. And even good change contains loss. I remember being in a classroom discussion at the divinity school around change and loss, and someone was arguing that good changes didn't contain loss because their outcome was good. Now, Nora, my wife, and I had a newborn at home. And this baby was, and still is, one of the greatest gifts and changes in my entire life. And the amount of loss was staggering. Right? We lost sleep. We lost the ability to function as the adults we once were. We lost this relationship that the two of us had built as two people, and now we were three. Even wonderful change has loss. The poet W.H. Auden, in his poem The Age of Anxiety, says this: "We would rather be ruined than changed. We would rather die in our dread than climb the cross of the moment and let our illusions die." I'm going to say that again. We would rather be ruined than changed. We would rather die in our dread than climb the cross of the moment and let our illusions die. Does this feel resonant at all? So here again, back to Saul. We become witness to Saul experiencing great change, a change so profound that he knew something was different even though he did not yet know where he was going. Saul was in a privileged position and didn't really need to change. He had power and position and the important protection of Roman citizenship. His persecution of the followers of Jesus was acceptable, if not desired. He was firmly in the right, according to the mores of his time. He was upholding the status quo religiously and civically, and was in no way out of bounds in his persecution. But then the discomfort of change was put upon him. He was blinded and frightened and heard the voice of God through Jesus. He was called out of the habits of his culture and civilization, called away from everything that he knew was right. Through blindness, he was called into a new way of seeing and a new way of acting in the world. He was called away from being Saul, the persecutor, and towards being Paul, the apostle. He was called into change, and it was deeply uncomfortable, I am sure. So what does it take for you to change? To move through the discomfort and the loss that comes with change? Do we need a blinding light and the voice of God through Jesus for us to leave behind the things that no longer work for us? To give up the ways that we separate ourselves from God? To stop persecuting other beloved children of God just because our society tells them that they are somehow less than worthy? Do we need a theophany to be able to let go of some of our more hurtful paths? Would we stop consuming the earth, over-consuming the earth, if the light of God blinded us? Would we dismantle the caste systems that are in place if a voice from the heavens came to us? Would we stop inflicting violence upon others, stop accepting poverty as inevitable, stop disconnecting ourselves from others if Jesus told us that these actions were persecuting him? Do we need a theophany to change? Do we need God to shake us from our foundations in order for us to listen? Do we need to become blind in order to gain new sight? Maybe we do. Maybe we do need a theophany to make the pain of change worthwhile. Maybe we do need God to knock us down on our collective roads to Damascus. Maybe we do need this. And then what if this has already happened and we weren't paying attention? Or we dismissed it as being sunstroke or exhaustion. Maybe the theophany is all around us and we have altogether stopped noticing. What if we are waiting to change until we experience the dramatic calling of God and it has already happened? And here we are, still on the ground, blinded, waiting for our sight to return. maybe it's time to get up. I wonder if a theophany has already happened. Or maybe it's still happening. If we are the people that believe that God is still speaking, that God is present within, among, and between us all, that the other is lovable just like we are, then that theophany is ongoing. It might not be as direct and dramatic as the one in this story, but the visible manifestation of God is everywhere and always. We just have to want to see it and then let it change us. We have to be brave enough to get up off the ground, blind and afraid, and let our companions walk on this road with us. We need to let go of the assumed surety of our past and be willing to be led into an unknown future. We are asked to be courageous enough to let God change us, to see the world anew, and to keep acting in love. We have to allow ourselves to be blinded so that we can see the way that God is calling us to see. We have to stop persecuting Jesus, who is found everywhere in our world. We have to be willing to change. This is our calling. This is what is asked of us. This is who we get to be. We are supposed to receive the surrounding theophany and change. To change does not mean to forget who we once were before, but to root ourselves in that past in order to be changed for the future. What was past is not what will be. But all that will be is rooted in the past. What was past is not what will be, but all that will be is rooted in the soil of the past. So what does it take for you to change? For us to change, to do it together? What does it take to pay attention to the theophany, this continued visible manifestation of God that is around us always? How do we respond to this calling, to this powerful, blinding gift? May we receive this calling with grace and humility, with love and compassion. May we be courageous and not be stopped by the discomfort of change. And may we stop persecuting Jesus in our midst. May it be so, together.